Today's a great day, everybody. This is, I heard you when you said the podcast where you find out the things you need to know and the things that you didn't need to know and the things that you know that you didn't know that you needed to know. And if that made sense, then you're part of our audience. And welcome to episode number something. I have no idea what episode it is. But the reason I said, what is it?
17.
17. Look at that. We've thrown a few out along the way, so I'll lose count. If you have been following along on the video format, then you'll be maybe happy to know. At least you'll be surprised to know. This is the last time this video format will be done, because when we record the next podcast, Stacy will be in Texas, not too far away from where I am. Some would say within walking distance. Some might stay a stone's throw, if the expression holds up. And we'll be in the same room in our quote unquote office, quote unquote podcast studio, quote unquote something else, whatever, I don't know, that we can make episodes happen in there. So welcome for the first time. Welcome back if it's not your first time. And Stacy, what do the people need to know today?
Well, first, the people need to know that we are not doctors and we do not play them on the internet. Anything we say or do cannot be used against us at any point from this moment moving forward. And I'm super excited to be here. This is almost like the end of an era, right? I was thinking about that as I got up this morning. Like, I painted this room and built this room to step into this business, like before it was ours, to get it, to really take coaching full time. And every podcast we've recorded, other than the times we've been at your house, has been from this room. And so it actually is, it's not even bittersweet. It's just really, really sweet to go. I couldn't have imagined when we started this. I mean, we've had our podcast for, however long, but all the things we recorded prior, that this next season would be as phenomenal as it is. And, for safety's sake, I mean, I'm going to kind of like say, let's not throw stones. But I mean, you could throw a stone. You're strong enough to throw a stone at me for the distance between us. But, just to keep the neighborhood happy before we take over the HOA, let's make friends.
I'm not sure that anything we've ever done, that safety is the first concern. So I wanted to put that out there. But if that's a guideline we're using, moving forward, then that's fine. I'm okay with that. Whatever creates stability in the relationship, I'm okay with that.
Listen, that was brilliant. That was amazing.
I think you meant other people's safety. That's probably what you were alluding to in that comment.
I meant other people's safety.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we do consider our safety a little bit since we're going to be back on the mat, but it's not our first thought. I can tell you, based on the Airbnbs that have been previously booked,
safety, not a concern. Cuteness of the inside, definitely a concern. For sure, a concern. Wi-Fi is not even a concern, obviously. For some people. It is for me. But, safety and Wi-Fi, not necessarily the top of the list, but hey, would it look good in Southern Living magazine on the inside? That's what we're actually going for when we rent Airbnb. So I just want everybody to know that was our, that's how we prioritize the selection process of places we stay when we're not at home.
I love how gracious you're being by saying we. That it was 100% me. I will have you know, though, I did take Wi-Fi into consideration for our office. And when I ordered internet yesterday, the nice person had to walk me down from 2 gigs that I was committed to. I was committed that we needed that 2 gigs. And he's like, how many of you are there? And I'm like, there's be 2 of us, 3 devices and this and this. And he's like, I think 1 gig is going to be good because I just set up a mall with 30 people and they have 2 gigs and they're running with great speed. But if you feel like when you get it, it's not enough, just call us and we'll upgrade it. On that note, I was thinking of us.
Hey,
I was thinking of us. The
you
first, I got
gotta
electricity and Wi-Fi are the first 2 utilities that are done.
you gotta make sure that the internet is A1 because that's how we make the money.
So that's what we do.
The other reason this is also a special podcast is because it's the very first in a series of podcasts that we're going to do, where we're going to bring the outside world into some of our internal codes of conduct, if you will, our internal, personal agreements that we make with those who work with us, with our clients. And so to bring everyone into that world, we have a document that we make everyone sign. And I'm using that quotation marks if you're not watching. Sign, basically acknowledge. It's not a legal document. It's a list of points. It's a list of rules, so to speak. Just to acknowledge, to say, hey, I have read these, I understand these. And so that way that there is some common ground moving forward as we start the coaching process. Now, we call these our rules of engagement, or in layman's terms, it would be client expectations. And essentially what this is a list of rules. And again, I'm using quotations to say they are more so guidelines rather than hard and fast rules that we expect the client to try to see the world through these list of rules, right? Try to adopt these characteristics into their behavior, into their psyche, into how they behave moving forward as we try to adopt some type of change. So it has a lot to do with the process of change, because that's what people come to us to do, right? They want to change, their nervous system function. They want to change their immune function. They want to change how their body looks, how much they weigh, how they sleep, all that kind of stuff. And so we're going to take the next several podcasts. We might not release them all in a row, but this is the first of the 7 that it will be, that we're going to break down every rule of engagement that we have. And we're going to talk about it, how we got to, how it came to be, what it means, all those type of things, and how you can take and use it in your own life. And so in a way, we're inviting everyone who's listening to this series that you don't have to listen to it in order. So, if you invite somebody to, hey, come check this out, this podcast, because of what they're, the series of things they're putting out, they can start anywhere at any time. It doesn't have to necessarily be in order. However, I would ask that you listen to them all in this little series, because it'll make a lot more sense if you do. Okay. So we're inviting you in to be, one of us, so to speak, like we always do. But this is more explicitly, this is not necessarily explicitly stated outside of the bounds of being a client and coming into either a personal coaching relationship with us, right, where we do our dual coaching method where me and Stacy coach a person, or our cohort offering where we coach a group of people, an educated group of people, along a 12-week curriculum. So anyway, Stacy, anything to add to that?
That's a lot to ask somebody to be like, hey, do you want to be one of us? Do you want to come sit at the cool kids table? We really don't say no to anybody, but you say yes to this, you're really saying yes to like changing your whole life. It's so, not to be dramatic about it, but you were so, nonchalant about like, hey, if you want to come sit over here, you can, it'd be cool. And I'm like, careful what you wish for, people, because you're about to level up on a way that you don't even know yet.
Be like Matthew McConaughey. Be a lot cooler if you did.
Be a lot cooler if you did.
I disagree with one thing that you said.
Oh my gosh, I love when you disagree with me. Please do it.
That we don't ever turn down anybody. We will turn you down if you're an asshole. Okay.
That's true.
And
That's
you're
true.
rigid in your thinking, and you're not willing to shift, which is what this entire series is about to be about. We will turn you down. But then not all money is good money, and not all people are good people yet. So
here's what I meant by this. We will entertain you. Like if you come to us and you're just an ass, I'll entertain you for a second. That doesn't mean you get to stay. You're welcome to try. But you are 100% right. We won't be in any kind of relationship with anybody, money or not, that isn't in alignment with who we are and what we believe. And this is just one of those tenets, professionally and personally. You're right. Thank you. Because I don't want apples on my table. Go ahead.
However, if you send us a good bottle of bourbon, you might get a little bit of a momentary pass. You might get a momentary pass. But if we find out you're an asshole, you'll be out anyway. And we'll have your bourbon, so no big deal.
It has to be good bourbon. Don't send us crappy bourbon. We can't be bought.
We can't be bought. We can be momentarily convinced. We can't be bought.
We can be momentarily swayed, but we surely cannot be bought.
I love it. So today, rule of engagement, I guess number one, or the first one that we're going to talk about, is be curious, not judgmental. And we could probably just end the podcast right there, and you would understand to some degree what we mean by that. So let's break it down a little bit more. This is what we have written on our rules of engagement: is be curious, not judgmental. When your flaws become more apparent, work to be curious about solutions instead of judging your mistakes. It takes more energy to resist change than it does to be curious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, like we do with everything that we talk about together, even amongst, just you and I, right, is what does all this mean? So let's define a little bit, right? So when we say curiosity, you could probably go and look up Webster's definition of curiosity, right? Everybody can go and do that. What we mean is a posture of your mind and of your energy and of your intention, right? So your curiosity to us is this posture of playfulness, of freedom to make decisions in whatever way that needs to be made. This internal dialogue of what happens if I X, right? What happens if we do this, put this here, ask these people, move here, spend money here. You know what I mean? What happens if? And you become a little bit more adaptable, or at least your mental dialogue is more adaptable to the situation. To us, that's what we mean by curiosity.
I really like the way, it's going to sound silly, that we defined it. Of course, I like the way that we defined it.
I really like the way that we defined it. We're so great.
Gosh, I really like us. I love what we do. We're the bestest. Until we're not. I love this idea of adult curiosity. And it's something that I love that we're talking about, because it's something that has to be curated. It's not something as an adult that comes naturally, unless you have children. If you've got children, then it elicits this response, small children, at a greater level than if you're just off adulting, either prior kids or when your kids are older. There's this thing that you just unintentionally follow culture, which is, okay, I become judgmental in a way that, really to protect yourself from harm, pain, all of those things, but to define it as like a playfulness with freedom, I think gives it a responsibility. Like there's a responsibility to curiosity other than just flippant recklessness. Because as an adult, you're like, you want me to be curious? Well, I don't have time to be curious. Like, I just got to execute.
I got shit to do.
I got shit to do. You want me to slow down and think?
Bills to pay? Oh, we can't be curious.
Well, unless you're curious how you paying them bills, then you get really creative, right?
That's why OnlyFans exists, right? Somebody got real creative.
How do we bring it back to OnlyFans? Like so many episodes. Hey, I'm not mad at that entrepreneur. Right? They saw a need and made a solution, and it was extremely lucrative. Okay. So my hope in this episode, in this conversation that we get to have, is that not only between you and I, but everybody listening is a little bit willing to be a little bit risky, so to speak, and challenge the way that they currently think about almost everything they're dogmatic about, which is a big ask. I get it. But if you think the earth is flat, you are a flat earther who somehow made it to this podcast, I would be like, okay, but what if it's not? What if it's round? And for those of you who think this is funny, like some people would have a visceral response to that. That, okay, what if you're wrong? And so one of the things, that we talk about a lot is just the freedom of we're willing to be wrong. For as playful we are, as I'm like, hey, I like us. I like when we're right. I like to be right. Nobody likes to be wrong. Curiosity is like, hey, I'm willing to be wrong. So I could be, this is my disclaimer of how wrong I could be in this entire conversation. I'm proclaiming nothing to be right early on. The disclaimer has been laid.
I really hope that there is someone listening to this podcast that is a flat earther, because I don't see that as too far of a stretch as to who this, who Apple promotes or Spotify promotes this podcast to. But what would really make my heart happy is if they sent you a plethora of what they believe to be evidence of that fact. That would be something serious. Now, I'm not issuing that as a challenge to people who just think it's funny to do that, but that would be something interesting to say the least. I do have a question for you though.
Sure.
So that everybody can get a little bit more of a full spectrum understanding is your cord is doing funny things behind you. Is there a dog playing with it?
Gemma keeps walking behind me.
Okay, I can see the plug-in behind you, and it's like going like this, and I'm like, I see there's a little critter back there.
Gemma keeps, she ate the other cord. So that's the cord currently so that my laptop could be.
Gotcha. So my question is there a risk involved with being curious? Or risks? Are there risks involved?
I say there are no risks. Let me take that back. The risk in being curious is challenging your flexibility. The risk of being curious is you have to be willing to be flexible about everything you hold to be true. And be flexible enough to go, what if I'm wrong? I'm not saying that you are. Pick anything, whatever it is, from your religious beliefs to the earth to, is water actually made out of 2 hydrogens and an oxygen? Like whatever is true that, or you perceive to be true. If you're curious about it, you have to be secure enough in who you are and the foundation you have laid to risk exploring it, even if it comes out to nothing. From my perspective, I say there's a greater risk in not being curious than there ever is in curiosity. And just because you are emotionally or even intellectually curious about something and doesn't mean you act out on it. I'm curious of what the freaking bottom of the ocean looks like, but I'm not going down there. Like I'll research it to the nth degree. If there's something that sparks my curiosity, I can become an expert on it really quick on the dumbest thing, but I'll be like, hey, pick anything random. But I mean, yoga, for example. I mean, I was curious, became an expert. I was curious, became an expert. I just scratched an itch, and yet here we are, 11 years later, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think it's worth saying that there is a risk involved in not being curious too. So we're posing it as, what are the risks involved in you taking on the posture of curiosity with things that you loosely hold to be true or the things that you strongly hold to be true, right? I mean, there's there's a spectrum there, right? Like there's religious beliefs, the earth is round, like all these things that like create our existence. But then there's loosely held beliefs like, well, I loosely believe that, the government works to our advantage. Like, I don't know, right? Something that is this, that could go either way, right?
The thought I have in my mind right now was like, was 9/11 an inside job?
Right.
Could we be curious?
Loosely believe, right?
Loosely believe.
We're only bringing up conspiracy theories because that's what everybody, they put believe around that word. But there is also a risk involved in not being curious, just like there's a risk involved in not doing anything, right? There's a risk involved in inaction or, choosing not to do something, because at the end of the day, that could actually be your detriment. And that's our challenge, is that we think being anti-curious, we think lacking the development of curiosity as you go through processes of change, right? As you start to want to lose weight, want to raise your income, want to, I don't know, parent differently, want to whatever, relate to people differently. As you go through that change, mistakes happen because you're not perfect at change, right? It's just like you wanting to be an expert in yoga or just like pulling on that thread really, really like for a long time. Like, how much more can I find out? How much better can I be? And in that process, if you thought you knew everything at the outset, well, then that actually hinders you, right? If you judge the fact that you didn't know everything because there was some obvious thing that you fell flat on your face for some reason, either literally or, metaphorically, that you were like, well, I could choose to get mad about this and just call myself an idiot and judge the fact that I even started this in the first place, or like think this is all I'll ever know and this is as good as I'll ever be. Or I could try to be more open-minded about this and explore the possibilities that there are things that I don't know. There are creative solutions that I haven't explored yet. There are people that I can talk to. There are resources that I haven't tapped into yet. Or simply, I haven't spent enough time, in and around one area to be able to understand this to the level that I want to, right? To be able to change my, association with this, whether that's yoga or your body or your spouse or your kids, whatever it is. And so to kind of bring that loop back, is not being curious is just as much of a risk as being too curious and irresponsible, which is where you kind of brought up in the beginning of the conversation.
Do you think you're biased more one way than the other?
Absolutely.
Where's your bias?
I'll go so far as to say our bias.
It's our bias. It's our bias.
Our bias is on curiosity. And the reason I say that is because we self-select by being entrepreneurs. You can't be an entrepreneur and not be curious. Just doesn't work. I mean, you can try, but you can't be an entrepreneur and not be, because the world will, like, the market will knock you down. The market will tell you if what idea you have is shit or not. And even if it's good, if you can promote it or not. And if you're not curious about solutions to your problems, because that's all businesses are creative solutions to everyday people's problems, then you'll fall out. right? You won't be an entrepreneur for very long. So I would say we self-select for curiosity by owning our own business.
That's a good perspective. I agree with you. Do you remember a time that it wasn't your bias? Like, was there ever a time that not being curious was more where you leaned than where we are now?
I would say if there was a more of a chance that I was not curious rather than curious. The reason I am preempting that is because I don't think there's ever been a time where I haven't been at least a little curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a time where I leaned harder in the I don't care and I'm not really curious about that direction, was probably before I had kids, right? So before Kaysen, it was probably just that's the way that things are because I was just responsible for me, basically. You know what I mean? Like that was just I didn't have like ultimate like farther reaching responsibilities. But the moment that you figure out that might not be when the kid is born, but the moment that you figure out that you have an ultimate far reaching responsibility to serve in whatever capacity, whether that's serving other people or serving your children or serving your friends and your spouse and all that kind of stuff, then that's where I started to be like, okay, well, if not for me, then how can I be more curious for them?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that's where if I had to, on a timeline, if there was like more of a shift, it wasn't a sudden shift, but it was more of a shift toward the being curious direction, right? Or being okay with whatever happens, because that's another way of saying be curious, right? Being okay with whatever happens and being willing to adjust based on the current situation. That's where that probably started to happen.
I was just curious of the answer. I can't remember a time that I wasn't. And you could ask my grandma, like, even when I was little, she'd be like, oh, she's so precocious. She's so precocious, that one. That I think that some of that is innate. And also, which leads me to the next place I want to talk about, that there was a time that I wasn't because I didn't have the freedom to be.
Mm.
That the circumstances of our life were so volatile that curiosity wasn't something that I could execute on. That I had to be really rigid because safety was on the line. And that was one of the things is we talked about bringing this conversation about curiosity to the table of when do you have the freedom to be curious? And so I realized that not everybody does have the freedom to be curious depending on, what's going on in their lives. So let's talk about it because our lives were wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can look at a time where I got to be curious and we get to again.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that curiosity is also contagious. Just like judgmentalism is. That how do we equip people to lay the foundation? Like, hey, if you want to start playing with this idea a little bit, get curious about being curious, what do you need?
Well, the first thing you need is just some type of emotional baseline and some type of stability in your lifestyle, right? Like you need this. First of all, you can't be like constantly on edge, constantly worrying about what the next thing that is going to happen, right? Like volatile in whatever way, shape, or form, right? Either emotionally volatile, which I would argue is pretty much is like the root cause of everything that we associate, like every characteristic we associate with like high anxiety or mentally unstable or whatever that is. But if you're going to have the freedom to be curious, then the prerequisite for that is some type of stability and an ability to regain stability in your life, right? So Some people are stable just from lack of unstable circumstances, and they don't know any better. But when unstable circumstances hit, then they don't know how to recover. Some people are stable because they understand that there is a possibility that they could be hit with whatever problem at whatever time. And they also understand how to bring themselves back to center if they already get a little bit tilted one way or the other, right? So I would say the prerequisite to have that freedom to be curious is stability in your life. And this could be really any aspect of stability. So financial stability, emotional stability, relational stability, spiritual stability, right? Like there's a lot of different aspects of life that people may be a little bit more, like I said, tilted one way or the other on. It doesn't mean that you're okay with all those things. You may still be chasing improvement in all those things. But as long as you are okay with where you're at as you're improving, then that gives you, that's a prerequisite to have the freedom for curiosity. And when you have the freedom for curiosity, then you can actually use that to your advantage to improve those things, right? This is, curiosity is a weapon. It's not a, it's, we're not just telling, we're not just using it for using its sake, right? Curious for curious sake, like a child is learning and developing to be curious. We are developed for all intents and purposes, but we're pushing ourselves to actually continue development and continue to question the way that we think so that we can create solutions, right? Create maybe products that improve the world, or create relationships that are improve our lives and the lives of others, right? Those type of things. And so when you can use curiosity as a weapon to your advantage, then that's when change starts to get a little bit easier, or at least you're more consistent.
Dude, I can't even with you right now. This is going to be like one of those pivotal things that we come back to, benchmarks of, hey, remember the first time we talked about curiosity being a weapon? Like I don't get speechless very often, but I'm like, holy crap, that was amazing. So give me a hot second, because you painted a word picture that I don't even know that you painted. If curiosity is a weapon, let me rephrase this. Since curiosity is a weapon, that means you can be taught how to use it, that it's a skill that can be honed. And I have never heard it talked about that way. It was always something like, kind of like we talk about mindfulness and meditation and like the things in the ether that are, my woo background. Just for the record, there is more woo coming. I'm bringing it back to the table a little bit, not for this podcast, but that for it to be something like, hey, this is a tool, this is a weapon, let me teach you how to use it, makes it tangible and accessible, and something that people don't need to be afraid of. And it's a sharp tool, like so sharp that it's so useful. We let t-shirts go, but that might need to go on a t-shirt. That was pretty badass, friend. I'm sorry.
Maybe a sticker at this point.
Yeah, we don't really want merch. That's like something we don't want to manage. But make it a screensaver, a background. We can give you a digital file that I made in Canva.
You know what? We'll just make it a sound clip, and we'll put it out on the internet. That way everybody can have it. But what I'll add to that is that there are people who naturally, right, inherently, whether it's nature or nurture or whatever, that bias toward curiosity without even hearing this podcast, right? Like they don't even know that that's what they're doing, right? They have no awareness around it. There are people who bias in that direction, right? Just like there are people who bias in emotionally stable direction, and there are people who bias in emotionally unstable direction. Now, it doesn't mean you can't work to shift your bias, but just like when we talk about, people being a competitor mindset or people being a victim mindset, right? Like the mindset continuum conversation, is there are people who are naturally more inclined to go one way or the other. And it's up to you to be aware of which way you're inclined to go and work to bias yourself in a helpful direction, not a hurtful direction. So if you find yourself biasing into a rigid direction mentally, then this is exactly who we're talking to. Now, we're also talking to the people who are kind of feel like what we're talking about is, I kind of do that anyway. Okay, well, if you do it anyway, where do you do it less so that you can start to increase your ability to do it there, right? Or how can you do it better, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. But if we're going to go with the weapon analogy, right, if curiosity is a weapon, then change is a campaign. Okay, then if we're looking at like your ability to go from one state to another state, like this weight to this weight, or I want to be, the person who blows up on everybody to the monk of the situation, right? If we're going to like use picture examples, if I want to be less that person and more that person, then it's a campaign. It's never really done, right? It's something that you work toward. It's something that you have little battles here and little battles there, and you're constantly moving in one direction. And so if you're in a campaign, energy management is crucial, right? Mm-hmm. Resource management is crucial because energy is just one of your, several resources. So like time, energy, money, things like that. If the resource management is crucial, the reason we're giving you what we're giving you today, be curious and not judgmental, is because it costs you more energy to spiral and be judgmental about the mistakes that you made than it does to try to be curious about other solutions, right? Be curious about creative ways to move forward, ways that you might not have thought of before, or ways that you've thought of but you've never actually put a lot of effort into. Right. And so if we're looking at making a sustainable campaign and change long term, then being like judging your mistakes is much more costly of your resources than being willing to explore solutions from a posture of creativity, playfulness, freedom. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's the main benefit from my standpoint. That's the main benefit, is it actually costs me less to have a posture of curiosity. That doesn't mean you're whimsical. That doesn't mean you just like everything is possible. Like I can do everything. Like I'm not, like I might be curious about how I can play basketball better, but that doesn't mean I think I'm an NBA basketball player, right? There is an aspect of realism that comes into the equation, but the posture of curiosity leads to thinking that actually when it meets with the real world, it can create a solution that you might not have thought of before, right? And it attracts people who also have that same type of thinking. And so if you're like, man, change is hard. Absolutely it is. And it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of resources and skills to be able to move it forward long term. Okay, well, how do we manage that the best we can? Curiosity as a baseline is a really good way to start.
100%. And if energy is a resource, it's a limited resource, right? Like we don't have endless amounts of energy. It's something that needs to be stewarded. It then just becomes a cost analysis, which sounds so logical when we're talking about something that is such a pivotal change, right? That if it costs me more to be judgmental about my mistakes than it does to me curious, what would be the reason to stay that way? Just because you always have? It actually, if we're going to talk about risk, the risk is being willing to kind of surrender the outcome a little bit of if beating yourself up over a mistake, however it looks, whatever it is, you didn't know enough, or it was just reckless or careless, was enough to change your behavior, then you'd already be there right now. Like if beating the crap out of yourself emotionally was the solution, then the world would be singing Kumbaya right now. Mm-hmm. And that's not the case. So if energy is a limited resource, what would be the catalyst, so to speak, to make that pivot? Like, what is the thing that goes, okay, I realize that my energy is focused on, I've judged the crap out of myself and not seen any of the results that I've wanted, not relationally, not physically, not in my functional health. My body still is wrecked. How do I even start to become curious? Because that's scary to me.
Starts with awareness. So you're listening to this podcast because if you don't know what you don't know, right? So it starts there to go. You might be beating yourself up a little bit, thinking about past situations where you could have been more curious and less judgmental. Okay. So if that's you, we're going to stop right now and we're going to go, nope, that's not what we're doing anymore. Right. Because I'm aware now that I actually have curiosity, that curiosity is a thing, right? Being curious and less judgmental is actually a thing. I never thought about that before. Okay, cool. So now that we're aware, our next step is to create an intention. What's the thing that you can be safely curious about? That would be my next question. Because not everybody's going to be curious. If they're a flat earther, they're not going to be curious about if the earth is round, right? They can't safely do that because their whole philosophy of life is based on, maybe hinged on this belief or on a very few beliefs, right? But what's the thing that I can be safely curious about, right? Like maybe I think that the best way to make money is to sell a service, but if I was curious, maybe it would be to sell a product, right? We could safely be curious about, right? That's a generally, those are both kind of flexible things that we can think about, and that's just a loose example. But we're going to create an intention, no matter what it is. We're going to create an intention now that we have an awareness around what curiosity is and how we are trying to not judge our mistakes. So we're going to create an intention around maybe something that we're a little bit more dogmatic about, right? Maybe you think that you have to starve yourself for 6 weeks and go do cardio every single day in order to lose weight. Well, what if that wasn't the case? What if curiosity got the better of you and you're like, what if I just went for a walk and ate like a little bit more protein, right? Like went for a walk every day, drank some more water, ate some more protein. I'm curious about what that would be, what that effect would come out to be. Maybe it's something along those lines. And then once you've created that intention and you know what direction you're going about the thing that you're trying to be curious about, whatever you've selected to be curious about, and you're going to use the whatever your intention is to move that direction. Now you have to take action on that process, right? Now you have to attack that in some way, shape, or form. So like using the earlier example, if I'm going to be curious about if I didn't starve myself and still try to lose weight, okay, well, how would I attack that process? Well, I'd wake up every morning and I'd start my day by drinking a glass of water, right? Or I'd wake up every morning and I would lay my clothes out to go for a walk or go get some type of movement in before I get started with my day, right? That's me attacking that process and being curious and not trying to be like, if I don't lose X amount of weight in X days, then I failed. So again, we talk about this multiple times. We'll continue to talk about almost every episode, I'm sure, is awareness, intention, and action is the base template, the model we like to use to get people to move forward. And then once you've created that, or once you've done that, now you've probably created an awareness about something else. Oh, I didn't really realize that I could feel good after a workout. I thought I had to be on the floor every single time, right? Now you're aware of something different. You can create a different intention. You can go and you can execute it in a different way. And over time, your posture does start to change from this, it has to be done this way, to I could see where you're coming from, right? I could see where that could be a little bit different. It doesn't mean that you change today, and it doesn't even mean that you change in a month. It just means that you're willing to explore other possibilities to see what it can teach you, and it just might change your behavior.
1,000,000% yes. If we're going to talk about change of behavior, I want to bring this to the table a little bit. This comes down to connection. And from my experience, this isn't something that I've heard a lot talked about, just like curiosity being a weapon, is that curiosity builds connection. And that could be connection with other people, or connection really with yourself, or a complete different connection with somebody you don't know. I think about even in our relationship, that at first you weren't super open to the way that I do things, the woo side of it. It's not that you were opposed, but you just had never seen it done this way before with longevity. And so you did this very thing. You're like, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be curious. Now, there was room to be judgmental. I mean, history had given all of us enough to be like, yep, out there sunning their buttholes. Or, drinking cat juice and, who knows what. But you were curious. And if you wouldn't have been curious and just have been judgmental, we wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here today because I also thought the same thing. I thought yoga was stupid and easy. I wanted no part of it. I also, truth be told, thought online coaching was dumb. That being so relationally driven, that how could you get the same results or even better results with people online? Because you would need to be in person to coach on this level. I'm so glad I was wrong. I'm so glad. The list of things I'm glad I'm wrong about just grows every day. I'm so thankful to be wrong. I don't know that I've ever been so thankful to be wrong. That in that curiosity builds connection, that you don't even know who your next best friend might be if you're all judging them for, I can't not say it, being all shirtless on the internet all the time. That's just my personal example. Other people have others.
Get you somebody who can do both.
Oh my God.
I mean, think about the things that we take for granted, right? Is at some point in time, there were people who thought that us flying in the air was not even a possibility. It was impossible.
Not even a possibility.
Right? Like not even close to a possibility, much less a normal thing. And here we are, however many years later after that was disproven. And it's not only is it a normal thing, but it's a crucial, like it's a key part of how we, get around. So, yeah.
I mean, you're a little bit younger, but I was explaining dial-up to my children the other day. That even 25 years ago, somebody had to have some vision to be curious to say, hey, technology could work this way. Like I remember when I had Nathan and I was working from home for a little bit, that I worked remote. And oh my gosh, trying to work from home 25 years ago was brutal. It was so brutal. And now I'm making sure we have enough bandwidth for our office to make it easier. Bring it back. Is that curiosity builds connection and judgment breaks it. There is not any conversation that gets continued in a healthy manner with yourself or with other people by judging it, by being judgmental about it. I'm not saying like, hey, let me have some thoughts about that. Let me process it. That's a little bit different, but you're wrong. This isn't true. Whatever it is does not build connection. So for people who are listening, and first and foremost, this starts with yourself, because you can't have a relationship with anybody else that you don't already have with yourself. I can't ask you to be curious with your boss or your spouse or your best friend or your children if you're not willing to be curious with how you think it, on your own. And the same thing is going to be with being judgmental. If you judge yourself really fiercely, well, I'm going to be willing to bet that you're pretty judgmental of other people too. And then I'm going to ask, well, how are those relationships working for you? What fruit do you see in those relationships? How much trust or camaraderie do you have there? And it's going to go back to, it's possible to do it differently. If you want better connections in anything, you cannot do it without curiosity.
So let's try to put a bow on this. and give people something that they can walk away with, which of course the awareness, intention, action is the biggest thing that I would say in terms of a practical, I can try this today solution. Something else to think about that might help shift your perspective if you're having maybe a little bit of a friction, like this is causing a little bit of friction in your brain around certain things, is you're going to have to shift your expectations when you start to be curious. So in the physical realm, which is where Stacey and I work mostly with and our clients, is to shift your expectations around what a workout looks like while we're trying to support the healing processes that your body naturally does. It's going to look totally different. It's not even going to look like a workout and what culture tells you is a workout, right? It's because we're training a different system. We're trying to use a different path. And so shifting your expectations is the main key to actually being good at being curious, at using curiosity as a weapon well. Is you like if you're going to be curious about what your training could look like, but all you've ever done is a bodybuilding weightlifting split your whole entire life, well, don't expect it to look like that, or don't expect it to give you the same like feeling as that, is because it's not that, right? So if you carry that expectation into a different activity, you're going to be disappointed, and you're basically shooting yourself in the foot. You're not going to put any more effort into trying to be curious in that direction. So you have to shift your expectations. That doesn't necessarily mean lower them, right? You can put just as much effort into something that you're curious about and you've never done before as you did into something that you know works and that you've done a lot. So you can put just as much effort. I'll give you an example, and this is going to be from like Stacey's point of view that I can, speak to, is how to do yoga. You're a, thousands of hours in yoga practitioner, right? You've got the yoga thing down about as well as it can be done. What you don't know is the functional nutrition side of the equation, right? Which is where I'm more strong in at this current point in time. But you understand that to be better at that, you have to willingly adjust your expectations and suck at it for a little bit, but put just as much effort into trying not to suck at it as you do into being really good at yoga, right? You're putting the effort meter is the same on both sides, something that that gives you that constant feedback of, man, I'm good at X position in yoga, right? This doesn't give you that feedback because you still suck at this side of it, right? You still don't get the feedback, the feel good stuff from that. So how do you continue to pour in just as much effort into it, or as much effort as you can muster? Well, curiosity becomes the critical point there, because if you're not curious, and I would say, like, as a side note, interested in getting better in that thing, then there's no way that it's going to happen. So you do need to adjust your expectations. First of all, don't expect perfection in anything, because we're human beings, but don't expect that you're going to be good at something that you've never done before, because curiosity doesn't mean you're not going to fall flat on your face. It actually means that because you fell flat on your face, now you're going to get up and go, well, that probably didn't work, right? But that plus this might work, right? Or this method that I've never tried before might work, right? So it's not foolproof to say that you're going to go in unscathed. You're probably going to go in a little bit more beat up. It's more about continuing to push forward than it is about trying to do it without falling down.
I say just fall down. Just fall down. Everybody's so afraid to fall. Kids aren't afraid to fall. They fall and laugh. They'll even jump. I think about, first of all, I'm really good at teaching yoga. I'm not as good as doing the yoga. My practice isn't pretty. Just in case anybody ever sees me in public at a class, my yoga is not pretty right now. Okay. I can teach the most badass class that'll rock your whole world. But if you're watching me take a class, that's still not pretty. It's still not pretty. That's okay though. And my functional health definitely knowledge is improving. Just that caveat for as I, Stacy and Justin in the wild, that people start seeing us at yoga classes. They're like, I thought they were good. No, they laugh a lot.
Don't put me in that category because I never claim to be good at yoga. So
everything's we now. I mean, if you technically, jujitsu is called involuntary yoga. And we are also not good at that, but we have the most fun doing it. So if the reward was fun, we win. We totally win.
Folding clothes with people still in them. That's basically what jujitsu is.
Oh my God, I love it. That expect to fall. These are conversations just to bring everybody up to speed that you and I are having, because we're about to step into a whole new world together that we haven't been in. And we expect there's going to be some friction. That doesn't mean we want it. It's just naturally going to happen because we invited a change to help us grow. Some days it's going to be messy. Some days it's going to be brilliant, but everything is figure outable. So I love this conversation on curiosity. Well, first of all, we wrote it. I'm kind of biased towards us. But let's not make it about us. Let's make it about, as we close, our clients and the people who we've brought through the cohort, how they have been able to shift their perspective and how their lives have changed by this tenet, so to speak. Because it's easy for us to make it about us because we wrote it, we built it, it's our company, like it's our friendship. This is relatively easy for us most of the time until one of us goes, well, hold on, to the other one. So as we wrap it, because we've given everybody the awareness and the intention and execution and why it's important, what's one story that comes to mind? Just one client that you've watched the greatest transformation in their ability to be curious and how it's changed their life?
So we have a client. I'm just going to keep them up.
Just say it. Yeah, say it. Just say it.
You want me to say her name?
Say her name.
Alyssa?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
You were saying Alyssa? Yeah.
I was thinking Alyssa. Yeah.
Alyssa. Shout out Alyssa.
I don't know that she listens to the podcast.
It's okay.
Once a week is probably enough of us for her.
We'll send her this episode. We'll send her this episode. Go to minute 57. We talked about you.
She'll be so mad listening to this episode. She'll be like, no, I don't want to.
So the biggest shift that I've seen in her posture is she has a very unique situation. Well, it might not be as unique as I think it is, but where she lives with her parents and her husband in the same household, and they are working to kind of create their dream home as it is, where they can all live together, right, in separate parts of the house or whatever, right, like this compound kind of idea. And she's also navigating the interpersonal relationships between herself and her husband and her parents, and navigating grandparents, in the midst of that. Not that they live with them, but that, we're taking care of them and things like that. And me and you have helped her, but also watched her push herself to grow in her understanding of how does other people's behavior affect my behavior, and what are the things that I'm telling myself that are true that might not necessarily be that, like, that's not really the way that they are, right? I have taken a rigid stance toward them when I could be a little bit more curious to see if we can navigate through this and around this together without pissing anybody off, right? In fact, the opposite of that, growing our relationship with those people in this, what seemed to be an impasse that we could not get past. We just diametrically were opposed to the way we see the world. I know it looks like that, but what if it didn't? What would it look like if it were easy? And so she started to take, it's a coaching process, right? There are weeks where it was terrible, weeks where a couple weeks in a row where, nothing we said made any sense. And that was just the way it was. And that happens. Like, you're going to have maybe months where you're like, this just doesn't make any sense and I can't get this to work. But recreating posture of creativity and curiosity, and trying to get in there and figure out where you could shift things to get a better outcome. That was what we challenged her to do. And of course, we coached her along the way, like, hey, remember, we're still practicing our breath work. Remember, we're still, trying to get enough of sleep. We're still trying to drink water. We're still trying to adjust our nutrition, right? We've been working on our gut along the way. And she has this thing now where she really doesn't come to us with problems anymore, so to speak. She's like, well, there's this thing that I'm navigating currently. Like, I've already taken the preemptive steps and this is what's going on. Is there anything that you think I could add? Right. It's become much less, here's the problem that I'm solving, or here's the problem, I don't know how to solve it, and I don't even know how to think about how to solve it, to here was the thing I could have seen happening. I navigated, I kind of got in front of it, and I'm working the situation actively. I just want to let you guys know. And then if we have input, then we'll add input. And if not, a lot of times it's like, hey, I can't say that there's anything that I would do differently or altogether add. And so we move on to a different conversation. So that's the biggest example in my mind.
She was my example too. And I know we're running a little long, but I have one more question because I want to tie this together. How does this tenet, this being curious and not judgmental, especially just talking about Alyssa, tie into the functional part of what we do in people's lives in functional health and supporting the systems of their body? Because that's the thing I don't want people to miss. This isn't just like a mind game or a mindset principle from the ethers. The reason this is on our rules of engagement, our client expectations, is because it's directly tied to everything else. So since you are the functional guru and I am just the baby Jedi, why is this piece super important in the journey that we take people on from a functional standpoint?
Well, let me just give you an example, and that will serve as the keystone that, there could be multiple examples, I'm sure. But what we're talking about here is fundamentally changing the way that the brain posture, the mind posture that you have towards things, so that you can change your behavior in the long run, right? It's not about trying to act good for 30, 60, or 90 days. It's about going, am I wrong about something, or could I be just not as right as I think I am about something, right? Is there something that I could shift more toward to change my behavior to get me to a better place, right? Or out of this hole that I'm currently in. Some people are feeling pain as they're listening to this podcast. Some people not necessarily feeling pain, but they know they could be more optimal, right? So no matter where you're starting from as you listen. One of the things I find a lot about is people are scared of carbs in the nutrition space. Okay. From a functional standpoint, the thyroid likes nothing better than carbohydrates. Your thyroid operates most effectively off of carbohydrates. It loves them. And if you know anything in the last 5 years about thyroid, because that's or probably 10 years, because that seems to be everybody's, issue is, got a low thyroid, or, my doctor told me my thyroid was out of whack, or whatever it is, that we ask people to eat carbohydrates in our program, at least for a little while, because we need that part of your system humming. That's a governor in the metabolic equation. That's something that we need highly active, high function. And so to be curious about, having a nutrition plan that includes 50% carbohydrates, right, at some points. And that's scary to a lot of people, because a lot of people hadn't eaten more than 50 grams, much less 50% of their total calories in a long time. And so that's just one example of where being curious is to see what happens if I do something different than I've always done to try to get a better outcome than I've ever gotten. And taking the posture that this might take longer than I thought it was, right? Shifting my expectation. What would it look like if it were different? And how would I feel at the end of the process when I change the way that I think about this thing? So is that a good enough example?
Oh, best example. Not just good enough. Out of the park. top notch, top shelf. That's not just like pumping you up. That was if I could have given a better example, I would have, and that is enough, and it's perfect.
Well, this is going to be my challenge to the listeners and the watchers and the consumers out there, is that if you do this already, or now that you're aware of it, that you can think of ways that you've done this well, I want you to shoot us a message on Instagram. Our Instagram handles are in the description of this podcast. If you've never heard of this before, you're like, this stuff is money. I also want you to shoot us a message to say thank you for bringing us awareness. And I know that sounds really like trite, like shoot us a message to tell us thank you.
Shoot us a message.
Yeah, shoot us a message to tell us thank you. Let me rephrase that. If it's helpful, we want to know about it, because if it's helpful, we can give you more of what's helpful, right? Mm-hmm. Especially in interpersonal conversations, right? Maybe what you need to be curious about is contacting us. Maybe you listen to us for however many episodes we're in now, 4 months, and you still haven't talked to us, but you love what we do. We like to talk to, we're not, okay. I'm not scary. Okay. I'm not scary. Stacy, it just kind of depends on the day you get her. Okay. Did the dog chew the cord? Right. Did he poop in the room? She can be a little bit scary, but she doesn't bite across the internet. Right. So she's okay. She's not going to put you in a chokehold or anything, jujitsu related. She would love to have a message from you, and so would I. So that's going to be my challenge as you wrap up this episode.
You look completely terrified talking to me every day. So if anybody is really worried about how scary I am, you could just look at Justin Carroll's face. He's fine. He's fine. I'm not scared. I'm not scared. I love that. Well done, my friend. So right. We're gonna end this. We're gonna end this era. It was the last time we do this way. It was a great episode.
Until next time, in person and live and in color, as they say, then we'll see y'all around.